In this video, we're going to talk about basic output. Output is the mechanism that allows you to take values from your software that you're writing and display them so that the end user is able to view them. In this video, we're going to focus on standard output, which allows you to display information to the screen of your computer. Remember that best practices recommend that you label your output so that when your end user is viewing it, they have context for the meaning of the values. In other words, we're looking at a computer screen and running some software, and it was displaying the number 13. You have absolutely no idea what that number 13 referenced. If you provided a label for that and said something like first quiz score colon 13, then you would have context for what the meaning of that particular data value would be able to respond more appropriately as the end user of the software. So be sure to label your output as you're displaying it to the screen so that your end user can appreciate the meaning of the data that you're providing. Let's look at an example program that includes some statements that allow us to print to standard output. We're looking at this short example from the notes, and you can see that it defines three integer data values, a 10, a 5, and a 9. And then down here at the bottom, there's three different output statements that display some information to the screen. Let's explore what each of them means. Whenever you're printing information to the screen, you have two different print method options. The first one is named just print, and it allows you to display information without putting a new line character or moving to the next line after you've displayed that data value. There's also a second version of the print method. This one is called print line. It has an LN after the T in the method name. And that allows you to print information to the screen and then also insert a carriage return so that you move the output to the next line after your information is displayed. Finally, it's important to know that you can use the concatenation operator, that's the plus sign operator, that allows you to print multiple items together within a single print method call. When you're calling the print method, don't forget to include the parentheses. Because you're making a method call, you have to use the parentheses to delimit the argument that you're passing in, where the argument is the thing or things that you want to print out. Finally, don't forget to include the semicolon at the end of your print method call. That allows Java to know that you've completed your instruction. Let's try out our example in IntelliJ. I'm going to erase my boilerplate code that just gets inserted in there by default. And I'm going to start typing my program. So in this program, I want to define three integer scores, 10. I think the second one was 5, and then the third one was 9. And we know whenever we run the program and it just has that code inside of it, it's not going to display anything to the screen. It does run the code. It tells us it finished with exit code 0, which means everything completed normally, but we didn't display anything to the screen. Let's add a statement so that we can display one of the score values to the screen. To do that, we're going to use the system class, and we want to print information to output. And I'm going to use the print method first to display one of the pieces of information to the screen. Let's test that out. You can see now when I run the program, it's printing the value 10. That's because 10 is the contents of my variable score1. That's the value that I'm telling it to display to the screen. Let's add another output statement. I'm going to call my print method with score2. Think about how you think the output will change now that I've added this additional instruction. Let's see if you're right. So you can see now it prints the 10 followed by the 5. So it's printing the contents of score1, that's 10, followed by the contents of score2, that's the 5. And because I used the print method, it does not print a carriage return in between those two data values. It prints them right next to each other. We can, of course, edit these output statements if we'd like to include something like a space. Suppose I want to include a space in between score1 and score2. I can use the concatenation operator to say, I'd like to include a space after score1. And you can see now when I run it, it prints the 10 followed by a space before printing the 5. Remember that best practices suggest that we label our output, so it would be ideal if we included some context for these numbers in our output display. We could include something like score one colon as our label. That's just a string literal. I'm saying print exactly this string, score one colon, and then a space. Then print the contents of my variable score one, and then finally print a space. And then my next print statement says, wherever you left off in your previous output, print score two right next to that. Let's see what happens. So you can see now on my display, it prints that label score one colon space. Then it prints the value of score one, that's the 10, then the space that we included after score one, and then finally it includes the value of score two on the same line. Let's edit this so that we also print a label for score two. Again, I'm using a string literal and then the concatenation operator to join together that label and the contents of my variable. And you can see now the output is updated so that I have score one, the label, and then the contents of the variable called score one, 10. And then after that, I have the label score two, followed by the contents of the variable score two, which is the 5. Suppose I wanted to update the output so that I have a line break in between these two scores. I can do that by changing my print method call to be the print line method. So I want to include the characters LN after the word print. That tells Java that I'd like to print a new line character after printing the data on that line. Let's look at how the output changes. So you can see now it has the label score one and then the value 10. It's also printing the space there. It's hard to see because there's nothing else on that particular line. And then because I included the new line character, it's moving to the next line after it displays that information. And then it starts printing wherever you left off. So it's going to print score two on that second line and then the contents of the variable score two. Let's look at our example from our notes and type that into IntelliJ. You can try this out as well. So in there, I said, hey, let's print out using the print method, a label, the scores are. Then I'm using a second print method call to print out the 3 different data values with a space between each of them. So I'm saying print the contents of score one, and then a space, and then the contents of score two, and then a space, and then the contents of score three. And then finally at the end, I'm calling the print line method again. And this time I put just empty parentheses. What do you think that might do? Let's test out our program. I'm double checking to make sure I got everything right. Okay, so the first line was a print, and then my second line, I wanted to print line. So I'm going to print the scores on a separate line. And then my final one was a print line. Okay, now we're ready to test it out. When I compile and run the program, you can see it prints the label the scores are. And then on the same line, because we did not use print ln, it's going to print the 3 individual scores, the 10, and then a space, and then the 5, a space, and the 9. And then finally, this last print statement, the print line with the empty parentheses, that printed the blank line in my output. So it created a blank space before I moved on to the next line of output where I'm printing score one and the contents of the variable score one. You can experiment with Java more to see how the print method, the print line method, and the concatenation operator can be used together so that you can see how to create standard output in just the format that you want to display.